When I started college, I was so excited to finally be out of my small town and in a place where I could meet new people and focus on my future. I was majoring in psychology, and one of my first classes I signed up for was behavioral studies. It sounded interesting, and the professor, Mr. Henderson, was young and well liked, according to the reviews online. The first day of my class, I noticed Mr. Henderson immediately. He was nothing like the older, boring teachers I'd had in high school. He was maybe in his late 20s, tall and charismatic. Everyone seemed to love him right away. He had this charm that made you want to pay attention. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but I started to notice that he looked at me a lot during lectures. He'd make eye contact with everyone else for a second or two, but with me, it always felt like it lasted longer. Sometimes he'd smile, like a small, knowing kind of smile. I didn't think much of it at first. He was probably just one of those professors who wanted to engage with the students. But then a couple of my friends in the class started teasing me about it. Mr. Henderson is totally into you, my friend Megan said one day after class. Did you see how he kept looking at you during that group presentation? I laughed it off, saying they were imagining things, but it started happening more and more. During discussions, he'd call on me even when I didn't raise my hand, or he'd compliment my answers in a way that felt a little too personal. One time after class, he stopped me as I was packing up my stuff. "You've got a great way of thinking, you know," he said, smiling. "Not everyone can analyze concepts like that." I mumbled a quick thanks and left, feeling kind of weird about it. Over the next few weeks, Megan and some others kept pushing me to make a move. They thought it was funny, like some kind of joke, but I didn't feel that way. It was flattering at first, sure, but something about it made me uneasy. I wasn't interested in him, and I definitely didn't want to be that student who had a thing with the professor. Then, one day, it got worse. It was after class, and most people had already left. I was finishing up some notes when Mr. Henderson walked over. "Hey," he said, casually leaning on the desk next to mine. "I notice you've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" I told him I was fine, just busy with assignments. "You know," he said, lowering his voice, "if you ever need help with anything, classwork, personal stuff, you can come to me. My office hours are pretty flexible." Something about the way he said personal stuff made my skin crawl. I forced a smile, packed up my bag, and left as quickly as I could. From then on, I tried to avoid him as much as possible. I sat near the back of the class and stopped making eye contact during lectures. But that didn't stop him. He'd still find excuses to single me out, like asking me questions or commenting on my work. Then one day, he took it a step further. We had a group project coming up, and he asked me to stay after class to discuss it. I hesitated, but I didn't want to seem suspicious, so I stayed. Once everyone else was gone, he closed the door. "I think you're really talented," he said, sitting down across from me. "You've got so much potential. I want to help you succeed." I nodded, unsure of what to say. "But," he continued, leaning in slightly, "sometimes you have to take risks to get ahead. You understand that, don't you?" I felt my stomach twist. I guess," I stammered. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Good, because I think you and I could have a mutually beneficial relationship. You help me, I help you." I froze. "What do you mean?" "You're smart. You know what I mean," he said, his tone still casual, but his eyes sharp. "If you don't want to, that's fine. But just know that participation is a big part of your grade. It would be a shame if your efforts didn't reflect that." I felt like I couldn't breathe. Was he seriously threatening to fail me if I didn't, date him? Sleep with him? "I need to go," I said, grabbing my bag. "Think about it," he called after me as I practically ran out of the room. For the next few days, I was a wreck. I didn't know what to do. If I reported him, would anyone believe me? He was so popular with students and other faculty. And what if he retaliated? Eventually, I decided I couldn't stay silent. I went to the dean's office and told them everything. They said they'd investigate, but they seemed skeptical, like they didn't really believe me. A week later, I got called back to the dean's office. They said they'd spoken to Mr. Henderson and a few other students, and they couldn't find any evidence to support my claims. Instead, they accused me of trying to tarnish his reputation. I was shocked. That's not true, I said. I'm telling you the truth. But they wouldn't listen. They said my behavior was inappropriate and that I'd violated the school's code of conduct by making false allegations. They expelled me. I couldn't believe it. I was the victim and yet I was the one being punished. Now I'm back home, trying to figure out what my next move is. I still think about Mr. Henderson sometimes and wonder if he's doing the same thing to someone else. Part of me wants to go public, but I'm scared. If the school didn't believe me, why would anyone else? All I know is I'll never trust anyone in a position of power like that again. When I signed up for my philosophy class last semester, I was just trying to check off one of my general education requirements. I wasn't expecting it to be hard, just a lot of reading and essays probably. But on the second week of class, the professor dropped the bomb that we'd have to do a semester-long project with a partner. I hate group projects. I'm the type of guy who likes to do things on my own so I can control how it turns out. But no one had asked for my opinion, so there I was, watching the professor tell us to pick our partners. Everyone paired up so quickly that I barely had time to look around. I was about to ask a guy I vaguely knew from another class when I noticed someone sitting in the back corner of the room. He looked way older than anyone else in the class, probably in his 40s or 50s. He had thinning grey hair and these deep-set eyes that looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. I guess he noticed me looking because he gave me a slight nod, like he knew we were the last ones left. I didn't really have a choice, so I walked over. Hey, I guess we are partners, I said, trying to sound casual. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Looks like it, he said in a low, raspy voice. Name's Alan. I introduced myself and we awkwardly agreed to meet after class to plan out our project. At first, things seemed okay. Alan was polite but quiet. We decided to meet in the campus library twice a week to work on our project, which was about the moral philosophies of ancient Greece. Not the most exciting topic, but I figured we could split the work and be done with it. The first meeting was weird, though Alan showed up late, looking even more tired than usual. He didn't bring a notebook or a laptop, just sat there with his hands clasped on the table. I asked him what part of the project he wanted to work on, but he kept dodging the question, saying things like, let's just see how it goes. I ended up doing most of the planning that day. I didn't mind too much because I like being in control, but something about Alan's vibe put me on edge. He kept staring off into space like he was lost in thought. At one point, he mumbled something under his breath, but when I asked him to repeat it, he just shook his head. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. Alan barely contributed to the project, and when he did, his work didn't make sense. He'd send me these rambling paragraphs that had nothing to do with our topic, full of random thoughts about life and death and how everyone's playing a role in the big machine. I tried to be patient, but it was getting really frustrating. One day, I asked him if he was okay. I'm fine, he said, but his voice creaked. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, I just have a lot going on. I didn't press him for details, but he started talking away. I didn't press him for details, but he started talking anyway. He told me he'd been out of work for years and was trying to start fresh by going back to school. He said he'd been having health problems and hinted at some kind of legal trouble, though he didn't say what. The more he talked, the more uncomfortable I felt. It wasn't just that he was oversharing, it was the way he said things, like he was teetering on the edge of a breakdown. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the professor and asked if I could switch partners. I tried to be vague, saying that Alan wasn't contributing much and that we had different working styles. But the professor just gave me a confused look. Alan? He said, flipping through his roster. Are you sure that's his name? Yeah, I said. Alan. I don't know his last name. The older guy in the back of the room. The professor frowned. I don't have anyone named Alan in this class. I thought he was joking at first, but he wasn't. He even showed me the roster, and sure enough, there was no Ellen. I felt a chill run down my spine. That's not possible, I said. We've been meeting for weeks. He's my partner for the project. The professor just shrugged and said he'd look into it. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was Alan, and why wasn't he on the roster? Was he auditioning the class or something? But even if he was, why wouldn't the professor know about it? The next day, I decided to confront Alan. I went to the library at our usual meeting time, but he didn't show up. I waited for almost an hour before I gave up. The next few days were the same. No sign of Alan. I tried emailing him, but the address he'd given me didn't work. I even asked a couple of other students if they'd seen him, but no one remembered anyone matching his description. I was starting to feel like I'd imagined the whole thing. But then I remembered something. Alan had mentioned once that he was staying in one of the dorms on campus. He'd even joked about how weird it felt to be living with students so much younger than him. I didn't know which dorm, but I figured I could ask around. That's when I saw it. When I got back to my apartment after class, there was a note taped to my door. It was written in shaky handwriting, and all it said was, "Wanna do another little project with me?" I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I went straight to the campus security office and showed them the note. They said they'd look into it, but I could tell that they didn't take me seriously. I haven't seen Alan since. I don't know who he really was or what he wanted, but I can't stop thinking about that now. Was it a threat? A warning? Maybe both?